At a private event held at Abbey Road Studios, no one could have anticipated the devastating consequences of Roger Waters' attack on Ozzy Osbourne. That night, the clash between two rock legends would become one of the most unforgettable moments in music history, because Waters had never understood Ozzy's true character or his place in the industry. This story shows us how arrogance can destroy a person. In the historic corridors of Abbey Road, the biggest names in the music industry had gathered. While Paul McCartney was sharing nostalgic memories, David Gilmour stood quietly in the corner, and Jimmy Page was reminiscing about the old Zeppelin days. Pink Floyd's "Wish You Were Here" was playing in the hall, like a message from the past. 76-year-old Roger Waters, Pink Floyd's former leader and creative force, stood in the corner with his eyes fixed on Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy wore his characteristic simplicity, a black t-shirt and jeans, chatting quietly with Sharon, paying no attention to any pretense. In Waters' eyes, this scene was living proof of how rock music had been cheapened. Waters' discomfort dated back years. In the 1970s, while Pink Floyd was exploring psychological depths with The Wall, Black Sabbath was tearing down the bridge, in his view. The complex themes of Dark Side of the Moon represented what music should be in Waters' worldview. Thought-provoking, questioning, intellectual. But Ozzy and Black Sabbath had reduced music to something for ordinary people. "This is why rock music is dead," Waters muttered to music journalist Martin Clark beside him. "We used to create works of art in music. The Wall, Dark Side of the Moon, Animals. These weren't just albums, they were manifestos. Now they go on stage biting bats and think they're artists." Without taking his eyes off Ozzy, he continued, raising his voice. "That man turned music into a circus. We are the real artists, not them." Clark noticed Waters' increasing irritation, but chose to listen silently rather than intervene. Waters' loneliness after leaving Pink Floyd, the trauma of Roger Barrett's loss, his desire to take control, everything was setting the stage for tonight's explosion. Especially in recent years, his own solo career paling beside Ozzy's continued success had deeply wounded his ego. "That man still fills stadiums," Waters added through gritted teeth. "While I create real art, his circus show gets more attention. Is this justice? While I deliver social messages, he just makes noise." The anger within Waters was actually a reflection of his own failures. His last album, Is This the Life?, had sold only 200,000 copies worldwide. Ozzy's Ordinary Man album, however, had reached millions. This reality was driving Waters insane. Moreover, he had been in legal battles with his own bandmates David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright for years. Rights to the Pink Floyd name, royalty earnings, concert rights, everything was a matter of litigation. Meanwhile, Ozzy had been maintaining a happy marriage with Sharon for 40 years, had good relationships with his children, and was still touring the world. As the night progressed, the envy that Waters felt but refused to acknowledge only intensified. The respect surrounding Ozzy, the way young musicians approached him, even sharing memories of Black Sabbath's Paranoid album with Tony Iommi. Everything infuriated Waters even more, especially when he heard a journalist from Rolling Stone approach Ozzy and address him as one of rock music's most influential and enduring figures. He couldn't take it anymore. "Most influential figure," he muttered to himself, almost ready to shout. "When I wrote The Wall, I was criticizing the education system and addressing social issues." He couldn't even get his act together back then. Martin Clark watched Waters with concern, knowing he might do something in this state. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that like button because you're about to witness one of the greatest lessons in music history. Waters finally couldn't stand it and began walking toward Ozzy. The conversations around them gradually died down as everyone sensed a confrontation was coming. David Gilmour turned his head. Brian May adjusted his glasses. The room seemed to fill with electricity. "Ozzy," Waters said, his voice loud and sharp enough to be heard throughout the entire hall. "Look what rock music has become because of you. Music used to make people think, pushed them to question, had artistic depth. Now there's nothing left but noise, shows, and scandal." Ozzy looked up at Waters, surprise in his eyes, but no anger yet. He was used to such attacks over the years, but hadn't expected it from someone so famous. "Roger, what do you mean?" he asked calmly, squeezing Sharon's hand to show he was trying to stay composed. You know exactly what I mean, Waters continued, his voice growing harsher, drawing everyone's attention. While Pink Floyd was creating real art, you were on stage biting off animal heads. While we were giving people something to think about, you just entertained them. Raw entertainment! Is this the future of rock music? A circus act? Everyone in the hall held their breath. Even Jimmy Page had put his glass down on the table. Sharon touched Ozzy's arm, but he continued to stay calm. Roger, everyone has their own path, Ozzy said in a low voice, never raising it. You have yours, I have mine. Music is a vast ocean. There's room for all of us. But Waters seemed unstoppable. Years of accumulated anger, suppressed jealousy, and ego issues were exploding. Path? You didn't pave a path. You destroyed music. You used simple meanings, added no depth. While we were creating masterpieces, you were getting high on drugs. Then you presented these as art on stage. Everyone knows how talentless you are, but no one dares to say it because you're popular. These words caused the first change in Ozzy's face. His jaw tightened, his eyes focused. Sharon's worried glances, the uneasiness of friends around them, the tension in the hall. Everyone was waiting for Ozzy's reaction. Roger, Ozzy said. There was a sharpness in his voice for the first time, but he was still in control. Do you really know my past? Or are you just reading what comes out in the media? Waters smiled mockingly, now addressing the entire hall. Of course I know. Drugs, alcohol, scandals, animal incidents, antichrist claims. Classic rock star story. Media-friendly, but zero artistic value. This response was the final straw that broke Ozzy's last show of patience. It was as if his entire being had gained another dimension. The aura around him had grown stronger. You don't know anything, he said, with an authority in his voice that none of them had ever heard before. Time seemed to stop in the hall. I grew up in the poorest neighborhoods of Birmingham, Roger, Ozzy began, his voice now commanding the entire hall. In Aston, in workers' houses. My father Harold worked shifts at the steel factory. My mother Lillian cleaned other families' houses at night so we wouldn't go hungry. You, on the other hand, were educated at Cambridge, grew up in a middle-class family in Surrey, had a piano in your house. You never saw real poverty. Did you ever go to bed hungry? Waters' face was changing, the mocking smile beginning to fade because these facts were known to everyone. I left school at 15 and started working at a slaughterhouse. I was slaughtering cattle every day because we needed the money. The smell on my hands never came out. Meanwhile, you were learning aesthetic theories at art school. Ozzy's voice was growing stronger, the weight of experience reflecting in every word. When we started in music, no one gave us a chance because we were working-class kids. Geezer Butler, Tony Iommi, Bill Ward. We all came from the same situation. You, as an art school graduate, built your music on the foundations laid by Roger Barrett. We started from nothing, from scratch. Even David Gilmour was nodding in agreement because Pink Floyd's formation was indeed based on Barrett's vision. When we formed Black Sabbath, no one knew what heavy metal was. We created that genre, Roger, completely from scratch. We opened a new page in music history. You made additions to existing progressive rock. This truth shocked Waters so much that he couldn't open his mouth. You say I used drugs, Ozzy continued, now with pain in his voice as well. Yes, I did, and I regret it. But do you know what addiction really means? What pain means? What depression and trauma mean? When I went on stage, I wasn't just providing entertainment, I was sharing my own pain, my own darkness with people. Waters couldn't speak at all now. He could only listen. Iron Man wasn't just a fantasy. It told the story of the traumatic stress experienced by soldiers returning from war. Paranoid was the story of fighting mental illness. Children of the Grave was my deep concern for future generations. Waters' face had turned completely white because he was hearing the real meanings of these songs so clearly for the first time. You, on the other hand, made music to feed your own ego, to prove your intellectual superiority. That's the difference, Roger. The hall had become so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. Paul McCartney was amazed, and Brian May seemed to be taking notes on Ozzy's analysis. And one more thing, Ozzy said, now with complete authority in his voice. After you were kicked out of Pink Floyd, no one cared about your solo albums. The pros and cons of hitchhiking. Radio Chaos. Who listened to those? I've been touching millions of people with my solo career for 40 years. Even Jimmy Page was moving his hands as if he wanted to applaud. Do you know how many families I've given hope to with Mama, I'm Coming Home? How many cancer patients? How many people with depression I've given strength to? How many young people's dreams I've protected with Dreamer? How many people I've made feel they're not alone in their darkness with Shot in the Dark? You, meanwhile, just sell your own pain, your own ego problems. Waters was frozen, unable to say anything because every word was true and everyone was aware of it. Ozzy continued. Moreover, you couldn't even get along with your bandmates. David, Nick, Richard. They all left you because you were a control freak. You wanted everything to be the way you wanted it. I, on the other hand, have been with Sharon for 40 years. My children love me. My team is like family. Because I learned to show respect. Even David Gilmour had bowed his head because Waters' role in Pink Floyd's breakup was known by everyone. Music isn't ego gratification, Roger. It's the art of connecting with people. Finally, Ozzy said, delivering the final blow, you say I turned music into a circus. But do you remember how many people came to your last concert? There were 5,000 people in a 20,000 capacity hall at London O2 Arena. Meanwhile, 50,000 people come to mine. Stadiums are packed. Where's the difference, Roger? People run to real emotions, to sincerity, not to your intellectual arrogance. Waters' last ray of hope had also died because these numbers were also true. We created the heavy metal genre, but more importantly, we've touched millions of people's lives with this music. How many people's lives have you changed other than your own ego? Waters' voice came out trembling. I was just trying to maintain the seriousness of art. But Ozzy cut him off gently but firmly. You just see yourself as superior to others. But real artistry begins with humility. It begins with connecting with people. As someone who came from the streets of Birmingham, I learned this. At every concert, I see people who came from those streets. I play for them. You still haven't learned. You're still stuck in that Cambridge arrogance. The hall began to applaud, first slowly, then with increasing intensity. A standing ovation. Paul McCartney stood up and applauded Ozzy. Brian May was wiping his eyes, and Jimmy Page was shouting, "Bravo!" Waters quietly left the hall, and as he walked toward the door, no one looked at him or spoke to him. For the first time in his 30-year career, he felt so humiliated and defeated. Ozzy, meanwhile, sat back down, took Sharon's hand, and continued his conversation, as if nothing had happened. Throughout the night, everyone talked about Ozzy's calm but powerful stance, his knowledge, and his maturity. The next day, the music media was shaken by this incident. Headlines read, Ozzy Osbourne silences Roger Waters. BBC, CNN, Rolling Stone. Everyone was writing about this confrontation. But most importantly, young musicians had learned a lesson from Ozzy's behavior that night. Real artistry lies not in arrogance, but in humility and sharing experiences. Waters didn't show himself for weeks, probably trying to confront his own ego. If this story affected you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe because this wasn't just a music industry anecdote. It was one of life's most important lessons. That night at Abbey Road, Ozzy Osbourne had shown the wisdom that comes with years, the greatness of his character, and what real artistry means. Humility always defeats arrogance. Sincerity always overcomes ego. We saw how even a talented musician like Roger Waters became diminished when he became a prisoner of his own arrogance. But Ozzy never changed in the journey he began as a working-class kid from the streets of Birmingham. Money, fame, none of it changed him because he never forgot where he came from. He knew how to connect with people, show them respect, and remain humble.